Hey everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel, Sunshine RCs. In my first video on my channel will be about RC soldering. In this video, I'll be teaching you how to solder xt60s, traxxas connectors, Deans, and bullet plugs. The very first thing you need to soldering is of course a soldering iron. The one I have is a Duratrax Track Power TK955, the digital one. The 950 is the analog one, it's a little cheaper. If you have a soldering iron that just plugs in the wall without a stand, I'd recommend getting a stand, but also a sponge. This sponge came with it, and just get it wet, but not dripping wet, so you can wipe off your tip and clean it every time before you solder. Of course, soldering, you're gonna want solder. This is 60/40 tin and lead solder. This is a rosin core, that's definitely what you want. And lead, it just solders way better than non-leaded solder. Non-leaded solder works, but just not as well as this. This solder is 1mm thick, really a good size for RC. It's only $4, so it's kind of nice to have a bunch of them. Accessories you might want for soldering. This is a soldering jig I got at my local hobby shop. They just kind of brand it as their own. They probably just bought a bunch of them and sold them. It has different sized holes for different plugs. So like an xt60 would plug in right there, and then it holds it up and you can solder it nice. And this is a Helping Hands I got at Harbor Freight. It usually has a magnifying glass, but you don't need that. And these alligator clips, here's a tip, they dig into the wire, so I just put some electrical tape around it so they're not as sharp. The first connector we're going to start soldering is an xt60 connector. And I'm just going to solder one of them because these sides are the exact same. You don't need to see me solder both of them. I have my wire and I cut it to length. This is 12 gauge wire. And we have to strip the end of this wire so we can solder it to the connector. For this xt60, you want to cut off or strip off about 1/4 of an inch of the insulation off. So yeah, and then you twist the wires so they're not all loose and hanging around. After we've stripped the wire, we have to tin this stripped area right here, and make sure that this part is twisted so it's not all crazy and big. I'm using the solder right here. And my soldering iron is set to about 700 degrees. So first, we have to tin the tip of the iron. I'll clean it off here on the sponge first. So we have to clean the tip of the iron. And then now we're going to apply some solder. Like that. So that transfers the heat into the wire easier. So the way I tin wires is I put the iron underneath, and then I apply solder downward. Okay, here's what I'm doing. Reaching the iron, just like that. Putting the iron underneath the wire, and applying the solder on top so it soaks through all the strands, and it won't turn into a cold solder. Make sure that the entire wire is coated. There's no bare spots. Now we have to tin the connector. By that, I got my tip. I'm going to clean it off first. Always clean it off. So I have the tip. I'm going to put some solder on the tip of the iron to tin the iron a little bit. So now, what I'm gonna do is hold the side of the connector just to heat it up, and then put some solder on the inside, just like that. Maybe a little too much, but yeah, that looks about perfect. Now I'll do the same for the other side. I have my iron pre-tinned for this, and I have the wire in some pliers because it gets hot. So to put the wire in the connector, what we're gonna do is hold it in the area, and then use the iron, till it's melting into the connector like that. Perfect. Now release the heat and let it cool. There's a little bit of extra, that's okay. All right, now it's on there. Perfect. Now that's easy to get rid of the extra. I'll do the other side now. Since I'm putting bullets on the other side, I don't have to put heat shrink on yet. But if you're gonna put heat shrink on this, make sure you do it before you solder it if this end isn't exposed, because you have to unsolder it to put it back on. I just realized I soldered these on the wrong way. The curved or the angled end is the negative, and the positive is the flat end, because it says it. So I gotta redo this. I fixed my mistake. And now let's put some heat shrink over these. They might be a little tiny bit ugly, but that's okay. Heat shrink will cover it. Applying the heat shrink, this red one, see how it barely fits over the wire? That's exactly what you want. Because if it's big like this, and you slide it in, it's not gonna shrink enough. And then it'll just fall off. This xt60 plug is done. Here's the final product. And if y'all would have used this other side, it would have been the exact same, because the soldering ends look the same. Even though this is different, it would have been the same process. My desk is a mess now. But the next plug I'm going to teach you how to solder is a Dean's plug. This is, I'm pretty sure, the most popular plug in RC. And this one, you can tell I desoldered this just to show you. This one, the tinning of the iron, all that stuff is going to be the same. The stripping, everything's going to be the same, but I'll just show you real quickly how to solder this. So I have my iron with a little bit of solder on it. I tin the wire and I tin the connector. So we're going to set the connector to only the stripped area on the terminal, and just heat it, and then they'll bond together. And don't move while it cools, because that could cause a cold solder and it won't be as strong. See, just like that. Now a Dean's plug is soldered. Connector, we're gonna solder these bullet plugs. The male and the female, the end is the exact same, so I'm just gonna solder one of them, but it's the same for both of them. So we're gonna tin the bullet side. The wire is the same as the other ones. We're gonna hold the corner right here and just put some solder on the inside like that. So the inside is nice and coated with some solder. And then when you put the stripped wire, that's also tinned, they'll just melt together perfectly. So now that the bullet plug is tinned and the wire is tinned, I'm going to hold the wire nice and firm and put it in the hole, and then heat up the entire connector, and the wire will just drop in. Just like that. And now let it sit there, and don't move while it cools. Perfect. That solder looks great. Bullet plugs are going to use a really long heat shrink, because these conduct electricity, so if these touch, it's going to spark. So it's going to cover the entire plug on the female side anyway. Just like that. And make sure it's not too big. And then when you heat it up, it'll stay. Now I just put the heat shrink on, and I would say it looks really nice. So how the male traxxas connector works, it has these two pin things. And see, it says wire side. So you solder right there, and the wire goes down the bottom, and you slide it into the slot, and you push it in, and then it'll click in, and then it just stays there. So there's no heat shrink at all required. The real reason I made this video was to make these, which are a female xt60 to a female 4mm bullet. So I can use it on this charger, a high-tech RDX2 Mini. Instead of having, like, this charger has two holes, This one has a plug. So you plug in the lead and it goes to whatever. But I wanted to be able to use a standard lead that has the male plug or the male bullets. So I just made these adapters and then it'll go out. Thank you everybody for watching. And hit the subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this. And I'll answer some questions in the comments if you want.